She collapsed against the gas station door at 2 a.m., 19 years old with bruises painting her face like a map of someone else's rage. Arthur Brown was just trying to get home to his sleeping daughter when he found Eleanor bleeding in the fluorescent light, clutching a backpack like it held her entire world. He was a widowed mechanic with calloused hands and a heart still learning how to heal, carrying groceries that cost more than he could afford, when their broken lives collided in that empty parking lot. Neither could have known that saving her would destroy him in ways he never imagined. Because the truth she whispered 3 weeks later, with tears streaming down her face as sirens wailed in the distance, would shatter everything he believed about mercy, justice, and doing what's right. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Gas and Go buzzed like dying insects against the October sky, casting harsh shadows across the cracked asphalt of Millbrook's industrial district. At 2:17 a.m., the only sounds were the distant hum of the interstate and the occasional rumble of freight trains, carrying steel and broken dreams through the heart of Ohio's forgotten towns. Arthur Brown's pickup truck coughed to life in the parking lot, its engine protesting the late hour and the weight of another 16-hour day. His hands, permanently stained with motor oil or regret, gripped the steering wheel as he stared at the receipt clutched between his fingers. $63.47 for groceries that would last maybe 5 days if he was careful. If Lily didn't ask for seconds, if the electricity didn't get cut off again. The math was simple and brutal. His last paycheck from Henderson's auto repair had been short again. Temporary reduction due to slow business, Henderson had said, not meeting his eyes. Arthur had wanted to argue, wanted to point out that he'd been the only mechanic to show up every day for 3 years, that he'd worked through his wife Sarah's funeral, through the nights when Lily cried for her mother, through the mornings when he could barely find the strength to make breakfast. But Henderson held all the cards, and Arthur held only bills and a 7-year-old daughter who deserved better than the hand life had dealt them. He shifted the truck into drive, thinking about Lily asleep in their cramped apartment above Kim's Dry Cleaning. The babysitter, Mrs. Chun from next door, would be waiting for her $20 money Arthur didn't have but couldn't afford not to give. Lily had been asking about Halloween costumes, about the school book fair, about things that other kids took for granted. Arthur had been telling her, maybe next month, for so long that the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Sarah would have known what to do. Sarah, with her bright laugh and her way of making mac and cheese taste like a feast, who could stretch $1 into a week and make their tiny apartment feel like a palace. But Sarah was gone, taken by a drunk driver on a Tuesday morning while coming home from her night shift at the hospital. The settlement barely covered the funeral costs, and the life insurance policy they'd always meant to update still listed her mother as the beneficiary. A Pautu woman who'd made it clear that Arthur and Lily were no longer her problem. As Arthur pulled toward the exit, his headlights swept across something that made him slam on the brakes. There, crumpled against the glass doors of the gas station, was a figure so small and broken that at first he thought it might be a discarded pile of clothes. But then he saw the way it moved, the barely perceptible rise and fall of breathing, the slight tremor of a hand pressed against what looked like blood seeping through a torn jacket. Arthur sat frozen for a moment, his mind calculating risks and responsibilities. He had enough problems. He couldn't afford to get involved in whatever this was. But then the figure shifted, and he caught a glimpse of a face in the harsh fluorescent light, young female, and marked with bruises that painted a story of violence he didn't want to read. Eleanor Davies had stopped believing in rescue about the time she learned that screaming only made things worse. At 19, she carried herself like someone much older, someone who'd learned that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. The backpack clutched against her chest contained everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, a water-damaged photo of a woman who might have been her mother, and $63 she'd stolen from Ray's wallet while he was passed out in his own vomit. The beating had started over the missing money, but it had continued for reasons that had nothing to do with theft and everything to do with the kind of rage that lived in men like Ray Hutchins. Eleanor's foster father, though the state had stopped checking on her months ago, had fists like hammers and a voice that could make her bones feel hollow. She'd tried running before, but the system always dragged her back to men like Ray, to houses that smelled like beer and broken promises. Tonight had been different. Tonight, Ray's girlfriend Vanessa had joined in, her manicured nails leaving scratches that burned worse than the bruises. They'd taken turns, like it was a game, like Eleanor was something less than human. When Ray had reached for his belt, Eleanor had finally understood that she wasn't going to survive this one. So she'd waited until they'd drunk themselves unconscious, taken what she could, and run into the night with no destination except away. The gas station had seemed like a safe place to stop, to catch her breath and figure out her next move. But as the adrenaline faded, the pain had overwhelmed her. Her ribs felt like broken glass with every breath. Her left eye was swollen shut, and something warm and sticky was seeping from a cut on her scalp where Vanessa's ring had connected. She'd slumped against the door, telling herself she just needed a minute to rest, just a moment to think clearly. But thinking clearly was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The truth was simpler and more terrible than that. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, and no reason to believe that tomorrow would be different from today. At 19, Eleanor Davies was dying in a gas station parking lot, and she couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at her and seen something worth saving. Arthur turned off his engine and sat in the silence, watching the broken figure by the door. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to drive away, to protect what little he had left. He thought about Lily, about the bills on his kitchen table, about the careful balance he'd built between survival and sanity. Getting involved would complicate everything, would risk the fragile stability he'd fought so hard to maintain. But then he thought about Sarah, about the way she'd always said that kindness wasn't something you could afford. It was something you couldn't afford not to give. And he thought about Lily, about the woman he wanted her to become, about the kind of father she deserved to have. Some choices, he realized, weren't really choices at all. They were tests of who you were when nobody was watching, when doing the right thing cost more than you could spare. Arthur Brown opened his truck door and stepped into the cold October night, walking toward a girl he didn't know and a future he couldn't predict. Behind him, his pickup truck sat running, the engine warm and ready for escape. Ahead of him, Eleanor Davies pressed her face against the cold glass and wondered if the footsteps she heard were real or just another fever dream of rescue that would disappear with the dawn. Neither of them knew that this moment, this convergence of broken lives in a fluorescent-lit parking lot, would be the beginning of everything that mattered. They only knew that they had nothing left to lose, and sometimes that's exactly what it takes to find everything you never knew you needed. Arthur's boots crunched against the scattered gravel as he approached the huddled figure by the gas station door. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted with the knowledge that whatever he found there would change the careful equations he'd built his life around. The October wind cut through his worn flannel shirt, carrying the scent of motor oil and something else fierce, metallic and sharp. "Hey," he called softly, still 10 feet away. "You okay?" The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge his voice. Arthur could see now that it was definitely a young woman, her dark hair matted with what looked like blood, her body curved in on itself like a question mark of pain. One bare foot poked out from beneath torn jeans, the skin blue-white with cold. Arthur knelt down slowly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. "Miss, can you hear me?" Eleanor's good eye opened, a startling green in the harsh light, and fixed on his face with the wariness of someone who'd learned that unexpected voices usually meant more pain. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged, barely audible. Above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Don't. Please don't. I'm not going to hurt you," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest at the sight of her injuries. Someone had done this deliberately, methodically. The bruises on her face weren't random. They formed a pattern that spoke of fists thrown with intent, of violence that had taken its time. "My name's Arthur. What's yours?" "Yours." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of the cruelty she'd learned to expect. But there was something different about this man with his tired eyes and gentle voice. His hands, she noticed, weren't clenched into fists. His posture wasn't threatening. When he'd said her name or asked for it, his voice had held something she'd almost forgotten existed. Genuine concern for another human being. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Eleanor," she whispered, then immediately regretted it. "Names had power. Names could be used to find you, to drag you back to places you'd tried to escape." "Eleanor," Arthur repeated, and somehow the way he said it made it sound like something precious instead of something broken. "Eleanor, I think you need a doctor. Can you stand?" She tried to push herself up against the glass door, but her ribs screamed in protest, and she gasped, a sound that was part pain and part desperate attempt not to cry. Arthur reached out instinctively to steady her, then caught himself. "Can I help you up? I won't touch you without permission." The question surprised Eleanor so much that she almost laughed. Permission? When was the last time anyone had asked her permission for anything? Ray certainly never had. Vanessa had taken what she wanted with nails like claws. The system had moved her from house to house like a chess piece, never asking if she wanted to go, never caring if she felt safe. "I can't pay for a doctor," she said, the practical reality of her situation cutting through everything else. "I don't have insurance. I don't have anything." Arthur sat back on his heels, studying her face. In the harsh light, he could see that she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 19, 20 at most. Barely older than the students he remembered from his high school days, back when the world had seemed full of possibilities instead of just problems. But her eyes held an age that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with surviving things that should never happen to anyone. "That's not your problem to worry about right now," he said finally. "Right now we just need to get you somewhere warm and safe." Eleanor laughed then, a bitter sound that cut through the night air like glass. "Safe, mister, I don't think you understand what you're looking at here." "I understand more than you might think," Arthur said quietly. He thought about Sarah in those last months, when the night shifts at the hospital had left her exhausted and vulnerable. He thought about the stories she'd told him about patients who came to the EO with injuries that told stories they were too afraid to speak aloud. "I understand that someone hurt you badly, and that you're scared, and that you have every reason not to trust a stranger in a parking lot at 2 in the morning. Eleanor's throat tightened. This wasn't how these encounters were supposed to go. Men who found girls like her in parking lots usually wanted something: payment for their help, silence for their secrets, gratitude expressed in ways that made her skin crawl. But this Arthur person wasn't asking for anything except the chance to help her stand up. "Why?" she asked, the word coming out smaller than she'd intended. Arthur was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Why was he here? Why wasn't he driving home to Lily, to his warm apartment and his stack of bills and his familiar problems? Why was he risking everything he'd worked so hard to protect? "Because," he said finally, a very smart woman once told me that we don't help people because we can afford to. We help them because we can't afford not to. He stood up slowly, extending his hand toward her. "My truck's warm. We can figure out the rest from there." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, calloused from honest work, steady despite everything. She thought about Ray's hands, how they'd felt like sledgehammers. She thought about Vanessa's hands, sharp and cruel. She thought about all the hands that had hurt her, used her, discarded her. But this hand was different. This hand was open, patient, waiting for her decision. "If I get in your truck," she said carefully, "what happens then?" "Then you get warm," Arthur said simply. "Then we figure out how to get you medical attention. Then we take it one step at a time. That's it. That's it." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. This stranger who'd appeared out of the October darkness with kind eyes and impossible promises. Every instinct she'd developed over 19 years of surviving told her to run, to disappear back into the shadows where men like Arthur couldn't find her and hurt her. But she was so tired of running. She was so tired of being afraid. And something, in his voice, something genuine and demanding, made her want to believe that, maybe, just maybe, not all hands were meant to hurt. Slowly, carefully, Eleanor reached out and took Arthur Brown's hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and when he helped her to her feet, he moved at her pace, letting her find her balance before taking the next step. Together, they walked across the parking lot toward his pickup truck, two broken people beginning a journey neither of them could imagine. Behind them, the gas station's fluorescent lights continued their electric humming, bearing witness to the moment when a widowed mechanic and a beaten girl decided to trust each other with their lives. Ahead of them, Arthur's truck sat running in the cold, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a promise that morning would come. Neither of them spoke as Arthur opened the passenger door and helped Eleanor inside. Neither of them knew that this simple act of kindness, this decision to see the humanity in a stranger, would set in motion events that would test everything they believed about justice, mercy, and the price of doing what's right. They only knew that they were no longer alone in the fluorescent-lit darkness, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. Arthur's pickup truck climbed the hill toward Maple Street, with Eleanor pressed against the passenger door, her fingers wrapped around the door handle like a lifeline. Every turn made her ribs scream, but the pain was secondary to the hypervigilance that had kept her alive for so long. She cataloged every detail, the way Arthur's hand stayed steady on the wheel, how he didn't ask personal questions, the fact that his radio was tuned to a classical station, playing something soft and UNDMANDING. The apartment building that housed Arthur and Lily Brown was a converted Victorian house painted the color of faded sunflowers, with fire escapes that zigzagged down the facade like iron tears. Not fancy, but maintained with the kind of care that spoke of people who took pride in what little they had. Arthur parked behind the building and turned off the engine, the sudden silence somehow louder than the truck's rumbling had been. "We're on the second floor," he said quietly. "There's a separate entrance around back. Mrs. Chun from next door is watching Lily, my daughter. She's 7. Eleanor nodded, though her stomach clenched at the mention of the woman. Every adult in her life had been a potential threat, and the idea of facing judgment from yet another stranger made her want to curl back into the protective shell of unconsciousness. But Arthur was already climbing out of the truck, moving around to her side with the patient movements of someone accustomed to handling fragile things. The stairs proved to be a challenge Eleanor hadn't anticipated. By the third step, her vision was swimming, and she had to grip the railing with both hands to keep from collapsing. Arthur hovered nearby, clearly wanting to help but respecting the boundaries she hadn't even known she'd established. "Almost there," he said softly. "Just a few more." Mrs. Chun appeared at the top of the stairs, a small woman in her 60s wearing a housecoat covered in tiny roses and an expression of barely contained curiosity. Eleanor tensed, preparing for the questions, the judgment, the inevitable conclusion that she was trouble Arthur couldn't afford. "Arthur," Mrs. Chun said, her eyes taking in Eleanor's condition with the sharp assessment of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 1 husband. "This young lady needs medical attention." "I know," Arthur replied, Can you help me get her inside?" Without another word, Mrs. Chun took Eleanor's other arm, and together they helped her through the apartment door. Eleanor found herself in a small living room that managed to feel both cramped and cozy, with mismatched furniture that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than style. Drawings covered the refrigerator stick figures under lopsided suns, houses with too many windows, a family of 3 holding hands beneath a rainbow. "Lily's asleep," Mrs. Chun reported in a whisper. "She went down around 9. I left some soup warming on the stove." She gathered her purse and sweater, then paused at the door. "Arthur, you call if you need anything." "Anything at all." After she left, the apartment settled into a quiet that felt foreign to Eleanor. No shouting from other rooms, no television blaring at volumes meant to drown out thought, no underlying tension that made the air itself feel dangerous. Just the soft tick of a clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Arthur disappeared into what she assumed was a bedroom and returned with an armload of clean clothes. "These were Sarah's, my wife's. You're about the same size. There's a bathroom down the hall if you want to clean up, and I'll heat up some of that soup," Mrs. Chun mentioned. Eleanor took the clothes, soft cotton that smelled like lavender detergent, and stared at them as if they might transform into something else in her hands. "Your wife won't mind? Won't mind?" Arthur's face softened with a sadness so genuine it made Eleanor's chest ache. "Sarah passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. She would have wanted her things to help someone who needed them." The bathroom was small but spotless, with a shower curtain covered in cheerful ducks and towels that were thin but clean. Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror above the sink and immediately looked away. The face staring back at her belonged to someone else, someone broken and used and discarded. The hot water from the shower felt like a luxury she didn't deserve, washing away blood and fear and the memory of hands that had hurt her. Sarah's clothes fit almost perfectly. The jeans were soft with wear, and the sweater was the color of autumn leaves. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt human instead of hunted. When she emerged from the bathroom, Arthur was standing by the stove stirring a pot of soup that smelled like home should smell, rich and nourishing and made with care. He glanced up when she entered the kitchen, and something in his expression made her want to cry. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah, thank you." He ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the small kitchen table, along with a sleeve of crackers and a glass of orange juice. Eleanor sat down carefully, her ribs still protesting every movement, and took her first sip. It was chicken and rice, simple but perfect, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something that hadn't come from a gas station or a vending machine. "I can sleep on the couch," Arthur said, settling into the chair across from her with his own bowl. "You can have my room. The door has a lock if that makes you more comfortable." Eleanor paused with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the transactions Eleanor had learned to expect from kindness. Arthur set down his spoon and met her eyes with an honesty that was almost painful to witness. "Nothing," he said simply. "I want you to get better. I want you to feel safe. I want you to have time to figure out what comes next without someone hurting you. That's it. People don't just help strangers for nothing. Some people do," Arthur said. "Not enough people. Maybe, but some." A soft sound from the hallway made them both turn. A small figure appeared in the doorway, a little girl with tangled brown hair and eyes the same warm brown as Arthur's, wearing dinosaur pajamas and clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. "Daddy?" Lily Brown said, her voice thick. "With sleep, I heard voices." Arthur's face transformed with the kind of love Eleanor had only seen in movies. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm sorry we woke you up. This is Eleanor. She's going to be staying with us for a little while." Lily studied Eleanor with the frank curiosity of someone too young to have learned that staring was rude. Eleanor braced herself for questions about her bruises, for fear for the rejection she'd come to expect from anyone innocent enough to recognize what she represented. Instead, Lily walked over to Eleanor's chair and held out her elephant. His name is Peanut. He helps when you're scared. Eleanor stared at the offered toy, at this small girl who had looked at a stranger's battered face and seen someone who might need comfort. Her throat closed with emotion. She thought she'd burned out of herself years ago. He's very nice, Eleanor managed, but you should keep him. He looks like he belongs with you. Lily considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but if you get scared in the night, you can come get him. Daddy won't mind. Lily's right, Arthur said, his voice rougher than usual. About anything you need, we figure it out together. After Arthur had tucked Lily back into bed, Eleanor found herself alone in his bedroom, a simple space with a double bed covered in a blue quilt, a dresser topped with framed photos, and windows that looked out over the quiet street. The door had a lock, just as he'd promised, but for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't feel the need to use it. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a peaceful home. Arthur moving quietly in the living room. The buildings settling around them, the distant whisper of traffic from the main road. No shouting, no breaking glass, no footsteps that meant someone was coming to hurt her. For the first time since she could remember, Eleanor Davies closed her eyes and fell asleep without fear. And in the living room, Arthur Brown lay awake on his couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he'd set in motion by choosing kindness over caution. Neither of them knew that they'd just taken the first steps toward healing wounds that had seemed too deep to ever mend. The trouble started on Tuesday morning, 3 days after Eleanor had first walked through Arthur's door. It began, as most small-town disasters do, with a simple observation made at exactly the wrong time to exactly the wrong person. Mrs. Dolores Wickham from apartment 1A had been watering her petunias when she noticed a young woman she didn't recognize hanging laundry on Arthur Brown's fire escape. The woman was clearly not Sarah. Sarah had been dead for 2 years. God rest her soul, and she certainly wasn't Mrs. Chun. The stranger was young, pretty in a damaged sort of way, and wearing clothes that Mrs. Wickham was almost certain had belonged to the late Sarah Brown. By 10 a.m., Mrs. Wickham had called her sister Margaret, who worked at the Millbrook Elementary School office. By noon, Margaret had mentioned it to Principal Davidson during their lunch break. By 2 p.m., when Lily Brown was called to the principal's office instead of boarding her usual bus, the Whisper network of Millbrook's concerned citizens had transformed a simple act of kindness into something far more sinister. "Lily, sweetheart," Principal Davidson said, her voice carrying the careful modulation of someone trained to extract information from small humans. "How are things at home? Is everything okay with your daddy?" Lily, who had inherited her father's honest brown eyes and her mother's stubborn streak, tilted her head in confusion. "Everything's fine. Why?" "Well, we heard that there's a new person staying with you and your father, a young lady." "Oh, you mean Eleanor?" Lily's face brightened with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a new friend. "She's really nice. She knows how to braid hair, and she makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches. She's teaching me how to draw horses." Principal Davidson exchanged a meaningful look with Margaret, who was taking notes as if Lily's innocent observations were evidence in a criminal trial. "And where does Eleanor sleep, honey?" "In Daddy's room. Daddy sleeps on the couch now. He says it's more comfortable, but I think he's just being nice because Eleanor has nightmares sometimes." The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the scratch of Margaret's pen across her notepad. Principal Davidson leaned forward, her expression carefully neutral. "Lily, has anyone ever told you not to talk about Eleanor? Has your daddy asked you to keep secrets?" "No," Lily said, now genuinely confused by the strange tension in the room. "Daddy says we don't keep secrets from people who care about us. Eleanor's not a secret. She's family now." Meanwhile, across town at Henderson's Auto Repair, Arthur was discovering that Millbrook's gossip network moved faster than bad news and with considerably more damage. He was elbow deep in the engine of a 1998 Honda Civic when his boss, Dale Henderson, appeared beside the work bay with an expression that promised trouble. "Arthur, we need to talk." In Henderson's cramped office, surrounded by calendars featuring scantily clad women and motor oil advertisements, Arthur learned that his personal life had become a matter of public concern. Henderson, a man whose own past included 2 divorces and a drinking problem that everyone pretended not to notice, had apparently received several phone calls that morning. "Look, Arthur, I like you. You're a good worker, reliable, don't cause problems. But I got Mrs. Patterson from the church calling me, asking if I know you're living in sin with some girl young enough to be your daughter. Then I got Bob Mitchell from the hardware store saying people are talking about you harboring some kind of runaway." Arthur set down the wrench he'd been holding, his knuckles white with the effort of staying calm. "Eleanor is a young woman who needed help. I gave her a safe place to stay, that's it. That's not how it looks to people, Arthur. You're a single man with a little girl, and you bring home some beat-up teenager? People are gonna think what they're gonna think. People can think whatever they want. I know what I did and why I did it." Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing this conversation was happening to someone else. "The thing is, Arthur, this garage serves the whole community. If people start thinking I employ someone someone whose judgment they question, it could hurt business." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Arthur had worked for Henderson for 3 years, had never missed a day, had stayed late without extra pay when the shop was busy. But loyalty, apparently, had its limits when it came into conflict with public opinion. "What are you saying, Dale?" "I'm saying maybe you need to think about your priorities. You got a daughter to think about, a reputation to protect. Maybe this Eleanor girl would be better off with people trained to help her social services, the church shelter, people who know how to handle these situations." Arthur stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. "Eleanor is not a situation to be handled. She's a human being who was hurt and needed help. And that's real noble of you, Arthur. It really is. But noble don't pay the bills, and it sure don't look good when people start asking questions." The conversation might have escalated if Arthur's phone hadn't rung at that moment. The caller ID showed Millbrook Elementary School, and Arthur's blood turned to ice water in his veins. "Mr. Brown? This is Principal Davidson. We need you to come to the school immediately to discuss Lily's living situation." By the time Arthur arrived at the school, his hands shaking with a combination of rage and fear, he found Lily sitting in the main office looking small and confused, with Eleanor beside her. Someone had called Eleanor to probably Mrs. Chun. Acting on instinct when she saw the school's number on Arthur's emergency contact list, Eleanor's face was pale, her green eyes darting toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. She'd changed back into her own clothes, the torn jeans and oversized sweatshirt she'd been wearing the night Arthur found her, as if Sarah's borrowed clothes had been a costume she no longer had the right to wear. "Mr. Brown," Principal Davidson said, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "we need to discuss the appropriateness of your current living arrangements and how they might be affecting Lily's well-being." "My living arrangements are none of the school's business," Arthur replied, his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "Actually, when it comes to the welfare of our students, everything is our business. We've received several concerned calls from community members about a young woman of questionable background living in your home with your daughter." Eleanor flinched at the words, questionable background, as if they were physical blows. Arthur saw her shoulders hunch inward, saw the way she seemed to shrink back into the broken girl he'd found in the gas station parking lot. Eleanor's background. Is her own business, Arthur said firmly. What matters is that she's a good person who's been through hell and deserves a chance to heal. Mr. Brown, I'm sure your intentions are admirable, but we have to consider Lily's safety. This young woman is a complete stranger with no verifiable history. For all we know, for all you know, she's exactly who she appears to be, someone who needed help and got it. Arthur's voice was rising now, and Lily looked between the adults with growing distress. Eleanor stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly in the tense silence. I should go, she said quietly. This is my fault. I never should have stayed. You're not going anywhere, Arthur said firmly, but Eleanor was already moving toward the door. Yes, I am, Eleanor replied, her voice hollow with resignation. This is what always happens. People like me don't get to have normal lives. We just bring trouble to people who try to help us. She looked at Lily, who was now crying silently in her chair, and something inside Eleanor seemed to break all over again. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Your daddy is a good man, and you deserve better than the problems I bring with me. Eleanor Davies walked out of Millbrook Elementary School that afternoon with nothing but the clothes on her back and the crushing certainty that kindness was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. Behind her, Arthur Brown sat in a principal's office, facing a choice between protecting the fragile family he'd built and saving the girl who'd become part of it. And in the hallways of the school, in the shops and offices of Millbrook, the whispers continued to spread like wildfire, carrying judgment and fear to every corner of a small town that had already decided what truth looked like, without bothering to ask anyone who actually knew it. Arthur Brown had never considered himself a man prone to dramatic gestures, but as he sat in Principal Davidson's office, watching his daughter cry and listening to the woman across from him explain why Eleanor Davies was a threat to their community's values, something fundamental shifted inside him. The careful balance he'd maintained between survival and principle suddenly seemed less important than the look of devastation on Lily's face when Eleanor walked out that door. This meeting is over, Arthur said, standing up with a finality that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Mr. Brown, we haven't finished discussing. Yes, we have. Arthur's voice carried a quiet authority that made Principal Davidson's mouth snap shut. My daughter is upset. A young woman who's done nothing wrong is being treated like a criminal, and you're asking me to choose between my community's prejudices and my family's welfare. That's not a choice at all. He knelt beside Lily's chair, meeting her tear-filled eyes with the steady gaze that had seen her through every crisis of her short life. Sweetheart, we're going to find Eleanor and bring her home. Okay, she said. She had to leave because of the problems, Lily whispered. She said she brings trouble. Eleanor doesn't bring trouble, Arthur said firmly. She brings light to our home and kindness to our family, and anyone who can't see that isn't looking hard enough. Principal Davidson cleared her throat. Mr. Brown, I hope you'll reconsider. Arthur turned to face her, and something in his expression made her step back. Ma'am, with all due respect, my family's business is my family's business. Eleanor is part of my family now, and if that makes some people uncomfortable, that's their problem to solve, not mine. They found Eleanor 3 blocks from the school, sitting on a bench at Millbrook's small bus station with her backpack clutched against her chest and tears streaming down her face. The next bus to anywhere, according to the schedule posted on the wall, wouldn't arrive for 2 hours, but she sat as if she'd been waiting for days. Arthur parked the truck and approached slowly. With Lily close behind him, Eleanor looked up. When she heard their footsteps, and the raw hope in her eyes before she could hide it behind resignation broke something in Arthur's chest. The bus doesn't come for a while, she said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Good, Arthur replied, sitting down beside her on the bench. That gives us time to talk. Arthur, you don't understand. Those people at the school, they're not wrong about me. I do bring trouble. Everywhere I go, Things get complicated for the people who try to help me. Lily climbed onto the bench on Eleanor's other side, her small hand finding Eleanor's larger one with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to doubt her own instincts. Mama used to say that some people think caring about others is complicated, but really it's the simplest thing in the world. Eleanor looked down at the 7-year-old who'd become her unexpected defender, then at Arthur, who was watching them, both with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You could lose your job," Eleanor said to Arthur. "Principal Davidson could call social services about Lily. People could make your life hell just for knowing me." "Let them try," Arthur said, and meant it. "Eleanor, 3 days ago, Lily was scared to sleep in her own room because she had nightmares about losing me too. Yesterday, she slept through the night because she knew you were in the next room. You taught her to braid her own hair, helped her with homework I couldn't figure out, and made her laugh more in 3 days than she has in 3 months. Eleanor's throat tightened. "That's just being decent to a little girl." "No," Arthur said softly. "That's being family." They sat in silence. For a moment, watching cars pass on the main street and listening to the ordinary sounds of a small town going about its business. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear her. "When I was Lily's age, there was a foster family, the Johnsons. They had this big house with a yard and a swing set, and Mrs. Johnson made cookies every Sunday. For 6 months, I thought maybe I'd finally found a place where I belonged." Arthur waited, sensing this was a story Eleanor had never told anyone. But then their biological son came back from military deployment, and he needed his old room back. "Social services moved me to a new placement the next week. Mrs. Johnson cried when they came to get me, said she was sorry, said she'd tried to find another way. But sorry doesn't change anything, and trying doesn't always work." Lily squeezed Eleanor's hand tighter. "We don't have anyone coming back to take your room," she said, with 7-year-old logic. "It's Daddy's room, and he gave it to you, so it's yours now." Eleanor looked at Arthur, searching his face for signs of the inevitable moment when kindness would give way to practicality, when good intentions would crumble under real-world pressure. "The people in this town don't know you," Arthur said. "But I do. Lily does. We've seen who you are when you think no one's watching. The way you fold our laundry without being asked. How you save the last piece of pie for Lily even when you're still hungry. The way you check the locks twice at night, not because you don't trust us, but because you're protecting us too." Eleanor blinked hard, trying to hold back tears that wanted to fall for entirely different reasons than the ones that had brought her to this bench. "I know you've been hurt by people who should have protected you," Arthur continued. "I know you've learned to run before you can be thrown away. But running from us isn't protecting us, Eleanor. It's just making all 3 of us miserable." A bus rounded the corner, its destination sign reading Columbus, and pulled up to the stop with a wheeze of air brakes. The driver opened the door and looked expectantly at Eleanor, who sat frozen between flight and the impossible possibility of staying. "Last call for Columbus," the driver announced. Arthur stood up and walked to the bus driver. "She's not going to Columbus today," he said calmly, "but thank you." The driver shrugged and closed the door, pulling away from the curb with a rumble of diesel engine and leaving the 3 of them alone at the bus stop. "You could have let me go," Eleanor said. "It would have solved all your problems." Arthur sat back down, this time close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "Eleanor, you're not my problem. You're my daughter's hero, my household's missing piece, and the best thing that's happened to our family since Sarah died. The people who don't understand that don't matter. And if Henderson fires you, then I'll find another job. Millbrooks. Not the only town that needs mechanics. And if the school keeps making trouble, then Lily and I will deal with it together as a family. All 3 of us." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then at Lily, who was watching her with the patient certainty of someone who'd never doubted that love would win in the end. "Okay," Eleanor whispered, and the word carried the weight of every leap of faith she'd never been brave enough to take before. "Okay, I'll stay." Lily cheered so loudly that people in the nearby shops turned to look, and Arthur felt something in his chest loosen for the first time since Sarah's death, the constant tension of a man trying to be everything to everyone, finally easing into the knowledge that he no longer had to carry everything alone. That evening, as they sat around Arthur's kitchen table, sharing leftover soup and planning how to handle the challenges ahead, Eleanor realized she'd stopped calculating exit strategies and started thinking about tomorrow. It was a small shift, barely noticeable, but for someone who'd spent 19 years in survival mode, it felt like revolution. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Davies was planning to stay somewhere long enough to find out what happened next, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Arthur Brown was building a future that felt like home. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, jarring Arthur from the first deep sleep he'd managed in weeks. The phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness of his living room, where he'd fallen asleep on the couch while reading technical manuals for the automotive certification exam. He'd been studying for insurance against Henderson's threats and a way to build a more secure future for his family. "Arthur Brown?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, carrying the kind of urgency that made his blood turn to ice water. "This is he. This is Dr. Patel from Millbrook General Hospital. Your daughter Lily was brought in about 20 minutes ago. You need to get here immediately." Arthur's mind went blank, the words hitting him like physical blows. What happened? How is she?" "She's stable for now, but we need you here. The young woman who brought her in said to tell you that Eleanor saved her life." The drive to Millbrook General Hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and terror, Arthur's hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Eleanor sat beside him in the passenger seat, still wearing the pajamas she'd thrown on when Mrs. Chun had pounded on their door, her face pale but determined. Neither of them spoke during the 10-minute drive, but Arthur could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from a fire. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant. And fear. Fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh relief. Arthur burst through the automatic doors with Eleanor close behind, both of them scanning the crowded waiting area for any sign of Lily. "Mr. Brown?" A nurse appeared at Arthur's elbow, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the calm efficiency of someone who dealt with panicked parents every day. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. Dr. Patel is waiting for you." They followed her through a maze of corridors to a small room where Dr. Patel, a thin man with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, was reviewing a chart. Through the window, Arthur could see Lily lying in a hospital bed, an oxygen mask over her small face and monitors beeping steadily around her. "Mr. Brown," Dr. Patel said, looking up from his chart, "your daughter experienced a severe allergic reaction tonight. Anaphylactic shock. Without immediate intervention, she could have died." Arthur's legs gave out, and he sank into the nearest chair. Allergic reaction? To what? She's never been allergic to anything. Sometimes these things develop suddenly, especially in young people. From what I understand, she ate something at a friend's house earlier today, a granola bar that contained tree nuts. The reaction was delayed, which made it more dangerous. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice hoarse. She woke up around 11:30, couldn't breathe. Her face was swollen. Her lips were turning blue. Mrs. Chun was babysitting while Arthur was working late, but she panicked and ran to get me. Dr. Patel nodded. Miss Davies here administered emergency first aid that bought us crucial time. She recognized the symptoms immediately, elevated Lily's legs to maintain blood pressure, and called 911 while performing rescue breathing. Most importantly, she found an EpiPen in your neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chun apparently keeps one because her grandson has allergies, and administered the injection correctly. Arthur stared at Eleanor, who was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, looking anywhere but at him. You knew how to use an EpiPen. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. One of my foster siblings, Jamie, had severe allergies. I watched the paramedics treat him 3 different times before I learned to do it myself. Foster homes don't always have people who know how to handle medical emergencies. Dr. Patel consulted his chart again. The reaction was quite severe. If Miss Davies hadn't acted as quickly and effectively as she did, we would be having a very different conversation right now. The weight of those words settled over Arthur like a physical thing. His daughter, his bright, brave, beautiful daughter had almost died. And Eleanor, the girl his community had labeled a threat and a burden, had saved her life with skills learned from the hardest kind of experience. "Can I see her?" Arthur asked, his voice breaking on the words. "Of course, she's sedated now, but she's out of danger. We'll want to keep her overnight for observation, run some allergy tests in the morning to determine the full scope of her sensitivities." Arthur pushed through the door to Lily's room, Eleanor hesitating before following. The sight of his daughter connected to machines, her face still slightly swollen from the reaction, hit Arthur like a physical blow. He took her small hand in his, careful not to disturb the 4-line, and pressed his forehead against their joined fingers. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was muffled by the oxygen mask, but clearly audible. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "Is Eleanor okay?" Mrs. Chun was crying, and I couldn't breathe, and everything was scary, but Eleanor made it better. She told me jokes while we waited for the ambulance. Arthur looked back at Eleanor, who was standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she had permission to enter. "Eleanor's fine, baby. She's the reason you're okay." Over the next few hours, as they waited for Lily to stabilize completely, the full story of what had happened that night began to emerge. Arthur had been working late at the shop, trying to finish a complicated transmission repair that would bring in enough money to cover their rent. Mrs. Chun had been watching Lily, but when the allergic reaction started, the elderly woman had panicked and run to Eleanor for help. "She was turning blue," Eleanor told Arthur as they sat in the uncomfortable hospital chairs, watching Lily sleep. Her throat was closing up, and she couldn't get air into her lungs. Mrs. Chun was hysterical, calling for an ambulance but not knowing what to do in the meantime. Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she continued. "I've seen this before. Jamie, my foster brother, almost died the first time because nobody in that house knew what anaphylaxis looked like. I swore I'd never watch someone else suffocate because the adults around them didn't know how to help." Arthur reached over and took Eleanor's trembling hand in his. "You saved her life. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Arthur said firmly. "Most people would have panicked. Most people wouldn't have known what to look for, wouldn't have recognized the symptoms, wouldn't have known how to use an EpiPen. You did all of those things because you've lived through hell and turned that experience into something that could save someone else." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "After Jamie died, not from the allergies, from something else entirely, I used to think that all the terrible things I'd been through were just pointless suffering, that there was no reason for any of it, no purpose to the pain." She looked through the window at Lily, who was breathing easily now, her color back to normal. But tonight, watching her struggle to breathe, knowing exactly what to do, maybe there was a reason after all. Maybe all those horrible foster homes and medical emergencies, and learning to survive things that should never happen to anyone. Maybe it was all so I could be here, right now, when someone I love needed me. Arthur felt tears he'd been holding back finally spill over. "Eleanor, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Eleanor said, finally meeting his eyes. "This is what families do. They protect each other." Around 4 a.m., when Lily was sleeping peacefully and the immediate crisis had passed, Arthur found himself standing in the hospital corridor, making a phone call he'd never thought he'd make. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Henderson's Auto Repair. This is Dale. Dale, it's Arthur. I'm calling to let you know I won't be in tomorrow. Arthur? What time is it? Are you okay? Arthur looked through the window at Eleanor, who was sitting beside Lily's bed, holding his daughter's hand and humming softly. My daughter was in the hospital tonight. Severe allergic reaction. She almost died. Jesus, Arthur, I'm sorry. Is she going to be okay? She's going to be fine. Because the young woman you and half this town think is such a threat recognized the symptoms, administered first aid, and saved her life. There was silence on the other end of the line. Eleanor Davies risked her own safety to protect my daughter. Dale, she acted with more courage and competence than most trained professionals. And if anyone in this town has a problem with her being part of my family after tonight, they can take it up with me personally. Arthur hung up without waiting for a response. Tomorrow, he knew, word would spread through Millbrook about what had happened at the hospital. The same gossip network that had painted Eleanor as a threat would have to grapple with the undeniable truth that she had saved a 7-year-old girl's life. As the sun rose over Millbrook General Hospital, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Arthur Brown sat in a vinyl chair watching the two most important people in his world sleep peacefully. His daughter was alive because a broken girl had turned her survival skills into salvation for someone else. His family was whole because love had proven stronger than fear. And Eleanor Davies, who had spent 19 years believing she brought nothing but trouble to the people who cared about her, finally understood that sometimes the things that break us are the very things that teach us how to heal others. The first sign that Millbrook's opinion of Eleanor Davies was shifting came at 8:30 a.m. Friday morning, when Mrs. Dolores Wickham, the same woman whose phone call had started the avalanche of gossip 3 days earlier, appeared in the hospital waiting room, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing an expression of profound embarrassment. Arthur looked up from the magazine he'd been pretending to read while Eleanor dozed in the chair beside him, her head resting against the wall. Lily was awake now, sitting up in bed and demanding pancakes, which Dr. Patel had declared a very good sign. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a small nasal cannula, and her color had returned to normal. "Mr. Brown," Mrs. Wickham said quietly, twisting the thermos between her hands, "I heard about what happened last night. About your little girl." Arthur nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. Mrs. Wickham had never spoken directly to him before, though her disapproving looks whenever she saw Eleanor hanging laundry had been communication enough. "I also heard about what that young lady did," Mrs. Wickham continued, glancing at Eleanor's sleeping form, "how she saved Lily's life." "Eleanor knew exactly what to do," Arthur said carefully. "If she hadn't been there." Mrs. Wickham's face crumpled slightly. "Mr. Brown, I owe you an apology, both of you. I made some phone calls earlier this week, said some things about Eleanor that I had no right to say. I was wrong." She held out the thermos with shaking hands. "This is just coffee. But I wanted you to know that I'm ashamed of myself. That girl is a hero, and I called her trouble. I don't know how to make that right." Arthur took the thermos, surprised by the genuine remorse in the older woman's voice. "Mrs. Wickham, people can change their minds when they get new information. That's not something to be ashamed of. It is when the new information was always there, and I just chose not to see it," she replied. "I saw a young woman who needed help, and instead of feeling compassion, I felt fear. That says more about me than it does about her." Mrs. Wickham left as quietly as she'd arrived, but she wasn't the last visitor. By noon, a steady stream of Millbrook residents had found reasons to stop by the hospital. Some brought flowers, others brought food, and all of them brought the kind of awkward gratitude that comes when people realize they've misjudged someone. Catastrophic ally. Margaret from the school office arrived with a bouquet of daisies and an apology that made Arthur wonder if Principal Davidson had sent her as an advance scout. "We heard what happened," Margaret said, her usual brisk efficiency replaced by genuine warmth. "Eleanor, honey, what you did? Well, it takes someone really special to stay that calm in an emergency." Eleanor, who had woken up to find herself surrounded by flowers and well-wishers, looked like she was having trouble processing the sudden shift in attention. For 19 years, adults in authority positions had meant criticism, judgment, or worse. Now they were bringing her gifts and calling her special, and she seemed to be waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I just did what needed to be done," Eleanor said quietly, the same response she'd given to every compliment. "No, dear," Margaret said firmly. "You did what a trained emergency responder would do. Most of us would have panicked." The most surprising visitor came around 2 p.m., when Dale Henderson appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable but determined. Arthur watched his boss approach, still unsure whether he had a job to return to. "Arthur," Henderson said, nodding. "Respectfully to Eleanor, Miss Davies." Eleanor looked up sharply, recognizing the name from Arthur's stories about workplace pressure. "I came to apologize," Henderson continued, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by something approaching humility. "To both of you. I said some things this week about judgment and priorities that I'm not proud of." He turned to Eleanor directly. "Miss Davies, I don't know you, but I know what you did last night. Bob Mitchell from the hardware store told me his wife works the overnight shift at the hospital. Said you handled that emergency like a trained paramedic." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably under his direct gaze. "It wasn't. It was exactly that impressive," Henderson interrupted. "And it made me realize that I was letting other people's ignorance influence my decisions. That's not the kind of man I want to be, and it's not the kind of business I want to run." He turned back to Arthur. "Your job's secure, Arthur. More than secure. And Miss Davies, if you ever need work, I could use someone with your kind of quick thinking and steady nerves in the shop. Good mechanics need good problem solvers." After Henderson left, Eleanor sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, she turned to Arthur with bewildered eyes. "He offered me a job, a real job. You deserve a real job," Arthur said. "You deserve everything good that comes your way." "I don't know how to do this," Eleanor whispered. "I don't know how to be someone people see as good instead of as a problem." Arthur took her hand, the same way he'd comforted Lily through countless childhood crises. "You don't have to do anything different. You just have to let yourself believe what other people are finally seeing, that you're exactly who you've always been. They just weren't looking hard enough before." The most significant change came when Principal Davidson herself appeared in Lily's room around 4 p.m., carrying a teddy bear and wearing an expression that suggested she'd been having serious conversations with her conscience. "Lily, sweetheart," Principal Davidson said, her voice gentler than Arthur had ever heard it. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Lily announced. "Eleanor saved my life. She's a hero." Principal Davidson glanced at Eleanor, who was trying to make herself invisible in the corner chair. "Yes, she is." The principal turned to Arthur. "Mr. Brown, I owe you and your family a formal apology. The conversation we had at school was inappropriate and based on assumptions that were both unfair and incorrect." She faced Eleanor directly. "Miss Davies, what you did last night demonstrates character, courage, and competence that our community should celebrate, not question. I was wrong to suggest otherwise." Eleanor looked up, meeting the principal's eyes with difficulty. "You were trying to protect Lily, I understand that." "No," Principal Davidson said firmly. "I was trying to protect my own narrow view of what family should look like, and I disguised it as concern for Lily's welfare. There's a difference, and it's an important one." She pulled a chair closer to Eleanor's. "I'd like to ask you something. We have a safety education program at the school, teaching students basic first aid and emergency response. Would you consider helping us develop a more comprehensive curriculum? Your experience and knowledge could potentially save lives." Eleanor stared at her in disbelief. You want me to teach at the school? I want you to help us teach our students to be as brave and capable as you are." That evening, as they prepared to take Lily home, Arthur found Eleanor standing by the hospital room window, looking out at the Millbrook skyline with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Overwhelming?" he asked. "Terrifying," Eleanor admitted. "For 19 years, I've known exactly who I was, someone people tolerated at best, someone they wanted gone at worst. Now they're calling me a hero, offering me jobs, asking me to teach their young ones. What if I can't live up to what they think I am?" Arthur joined her at the window. "Eleanor, you didn't become a hero last night. You've always been one. You just finally found people who were ready to see it. What if I disappoint them? What if you don't?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "I keep waiting for them to change their minds again, to remember that I'm the girl they didn't want around. Their families. Some of them might," Arthur said honestly. "But the people who matter, the ones whose opinions are worth caring about, they see who you really are now. And more importantly, you're starting to see it too." As they walked out of Millbrook General Hospital that Friday evening, Eleanor carrying get-well cards from Lily's classmates and Arthur carrying flowers from neighbors who'd never spoken to them before, Eleanor realized something had fundamentally shifted in her understanding of herself and her place in the world. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving in a community, she was contributing to one. The skills born from trauma had become tools for healing. The strength forged in darkness had become light for others. But as they drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, past houses where people now waved instead of staring, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this new acceptance was too good to be true. 19 years of learning to expect the worst had left her waiting for the moment when everything would collapse again. She had no way of knowing that her instincts were correct, that even as Millbrook was learning to see her as a hero, someone from her past was already making plans to remind everyone exactly where she'd come from and what she'd left behind. The black sedan pulled into Millbrook on a gray Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Lily's release from the hospital. It moved through the town's quiet streets like a shadow, drawing curious glances from residents who'd grown accustomed to recognizing every vehicle that passed through their small community. The car parked directly in front of Arthur's building, and 2 figures emerged, a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase, and a woman with bleached blonde hair and the kind of hard beauty that came from years of making difficult choices. Eleanor was hanging laundry on the fire escape when she saw them, and the clothes basket slipped from her hands, sending Lily's school uniform tumbling to the alley below. She knew that walk, that posture, that predatory way of scanning surroundings for weakness. She knew because she'd spent 3 years trying to forget both of them. Ray Hutchins looked exactly the same, broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist, dark hair slicked back with too much gel, and eyes that missed nothing. His companion, a woman Eleanor had hoped never to see again, spotted her immediately and pointed up toward the fire escape. "There she is," Vanessa Hutchins said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Just like I told you. Playing house with some sucker who doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." Eleanor's hands shook as she gripped the fire escape railing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear through the window and grab her backpack and flee before they could corner her. But Lily was at school, Arthur was at work, and running would mean abandoning the only real family she'd ever known. Instead, she climbed down the fire escape on unsteady legs and met them in the alley behind the building. "Hello, Eleanor," Ray said, his voice carrying the same dangerous undertone she remembered from countless nightmares. "You're looking well. Domestic life seems to agree with you. What do you want?" Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she felt. Vanessa laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What we want, honey, the question is what you took. $300, my jewelry, and our car when you ran off in the middle of the night. That's grand theft auto in Ohio. I walked, Eleanor said. I didn't take your car. Details, Ray said with a shrug. The point is, you disappeared with our property, and now we find you living with some single father and his little girl. Makes a person wonder what kind of arrangements you've made here. The implication hit Eleanor like a physical blow. It's not like that. Arthur helped me because I needed help. That's all. Arthur, Vanessa repeated, tasting the name like something sour. That's the mechanic, right? The one who's been harboring a fugitive from justice. I'm not a fugitive. Ray stepped closer, and Eleanor's body went rigid with remembered fear. You are now. See, we reported your theft to the police the day after you left. There's a warrant out for your arrest, Eleanor. Has been for 3 weeks. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. That's impossible. I didn't steal anything. Vanessa's ring is missing, the one her grandmother left her. Worth about $1,500. And coincidentally, you disappeared the same night it went missing. Ray's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we could call the police right now and have you arrested. Or ... Or, Eleanor whispered. Or you come home with us, we forget about the ring, and your new family never has to know what kind of person they've been protecting. Vanessa pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like text messages. We've already done some research. On your Arthur, did you know he's behind on his rent? And that his boss almost fired him last week because of the scandal you caused. Seems like adding a criminal record to his problems might be the final straw. Eleanor felt the world tilting around her. Everything she'd built, every moment of safety and belonging, was crumbling before her eyes. Please, I'll pay you back whatever you think I took. Just don't. Don't what? Don't tell the truth about who you really are. Ray's voice was mockingly gentle. Eleanor, honey, you can't run from your nature forever. You're a foster kid who aged out of the system with no family, no education, and no prospects. You survive by taking what you need from people who are foolish enough to trust you. That's not true, isn't it? You moved into this man's house, displaced him from his own bedroom, and now his daughter almost died on your watch. How long before? The next disaster? How long before you hurt them worse than you already have? The words hit every fear Eleanor had carried since the night Arthur found her. Every doubt she'd harbored about deserving the kindness she'd received, every moment. She'd waited for the other shoe to drop, it was all crystallizing into the nightmare standing before her. I saved Lily's life, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. You put her in danger by being there in the first place, Vanessa snapped. People like us don't get happy endings, Eleanor. We just destroy them for other people. Eleanor was 17 years old again, listening to these same voices tell her she was worthless, that no one would ever really want her, that every good thing in her life was borrowed time. The progress she'd made, the confidence she'd built, the sense of belonging she'd started to feel, all of it evaporated like morning mist. What do you want? She asked again, but now the question carried the weight of defeat. Ray smiled, sensing victory. We want you to come home. Pack your things, leave a note thanking Arthur for his hospitality, and disappear before you cause any more damage to his life. In exchange, we'll tear up the police report, and your warrant disappears. And if I don't? Then we call the cops. You get arrested for theft, and Arthur gets to explain to his daughter why the woman she thinks saved her life is actually a criminal who's been lying to them from the beginning. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to find some way out of the trap closing around her. But every angle led to the same conclusion. Staying would destroy Arthur and Lily, and leaving would destroy her. The choice wasn't whether to sacrifice herself, it was whether to take her family down with her. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tonight, Ray said. We're staying at the Millbrook Inn, room 237. Come by before midnight, or we make some phone calls. They walked away as casually as they'd arrived, leaving Eleanor standing in the alley surrounded by scattered laundry and the wreckage of her hopes. She sank down onto the concrete steps, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold them still. This was what she'd been waiting for, the moment when her past caught up with her carefully constructed present. She'd known it would come eventually. People like her didn't get to escape their histories. They didn't get to become heroes or teachers or daughters. They got what they deserved, which was exactly what they'd always had: nothing. When Arthur came home from work that evening, he found Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table with her backpack beside her chair, and an expression on her face that made his heart stop. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" She looked up at him with eyes that held the same hollow desperation he'd seen that first night at the gas station. All the healing, all the growth, all the confidence, it was gone, replaced by the broken girl who'd expected nothing and received less. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Arthur sat down across from her, every instinct screaming that whatever was coming would change. "Everything." "Okay, whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Eleanor laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "No, Arthur, we won't. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you realize that everyone who warned you about me was right. That I'm exactly what they said I was: trouble that follows good people until it destroys them." She took a shaking breath, and Arthur could see her gathering courage for something that terrified her more than anything she'd ever faced. "I lied to you," she said, and the words seemed to physically hurt her to speak. "About everything. About who I am, about what happened to me, about why I was in that parking lot. And the truth is so much worse than anything you could imagine." Arthur reached across the table for her hand, but she pulled away as if his touch burned. "Don't," she whispered. "Not until you know. Not until you understand what you brought into your home, what you let around your daughter." In the silence that followed, Eleanor could hear Lily playing in her room, humming the same song Eleanor had taught her last week. The sound of innocence and trust, about to be shattered by the truth Eleanor could no longer hide. She looked at Arthur kind, patient Arthur who'd seen her at her worst, and believed she could be better and prepared to destroy the only real love she'd ever known with words that would prove everyone right about girls like her. "Arthur," she said, her voice breaking, "I think I killed someone." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Arthur's face went completely still, his warm brown eyes searching Eleanor's face for some sign that he'd misheard. That the girl who'd saved his daughter's life couldn't possibly be telling him she'd taken someone else's. "What do you mean you think you killed someone?" Arthur's voice was carefully controlled, the tone he used when Lily had nightmares steady, patient, waiting for the full story before passing judgment. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, her body curling inward as if she could physically hold the words inside now that they'd escaped. "It was 3 months before you found me, at Ray's house. There was this man, Danny Kessler. He was Ray's business partner, dealt drugs with him, but he was different, worse." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Ray would hit me when he was angry, when he was drunk, when I did something wrong. But Danny hit me for fun. He said I had eyes that made him want to break things." Arthur's hands clenched into fists on the table, but his voice remained steady. "What happened with Danny?" Eleanor closed her eyes, transported back to a night that had replayed in her nightmares for months. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. Ray and Vanessa had gone to some party, left me alone with Danny to keep him company while he waited for a drug shipment. He'd been drinking all evening, getting angrier about something that went wrong with their business. She opened her eyes, meeting Arthur's gaze with effort. "He started hitting me, not just slapping, really hitting. Said I was the reason everything in his life went wrong, that I was a curse on everyone who tried to help me. I tried to get away, but he grabbed my hair and slammed my head against the kitchen counter." Arthur's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "I was bleeding, dizzy, and he just kept coming. He picked up this heavy glass ashtray, one of those thick ones from the 70s, and raised it over his head. I could see in his eyes that he was going to kill me. Not hurt me, kill me. Eleanor's voice began to shake, so I fought back. I grabbed the closest thing I could reach, a cast iron skillet from the stove, and I swung it as hard as I could. It hit him in the temple. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the tick of the kitchen clock and the distant sound of Lily singing in her room. He fell, Eleanor continued. Hit his head on the corner of the kitchen counter on the way down. There was so much blood, Arthur, so much blood. I checked for a pulse, tried to wake him up, but he was just gone. Arthur leaned back in his chair, processing the magnitude of what she'd told him. Eleanor, that's self-defense. He was trying to kill you. No, Eleanor said firmly. You don't understand. I didn't call 911. I didn't call the police. I cleaned up the blood, dragged his body to the basement, and when Ray and Vanessa came home, I told them he'd left early. I helped them cover it up. Why? Eleanor laughed bitterly. Because I was 19 years old with a history of running away from foster homes, no family, no witnesses, and a dead man in the kitchen. Because Ray told me the police would never believe some throwaway foster kid over an upstanding businessman like Danny. Because I was scared and stupid, and I thought helping them hide the body was better than going to prison for murder. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind working through the logistics and implications. Where did they say Danny went? Ray told people he'd moved to Florida to start fresh. Danny was the kind of guy who disappeared regularly, so no one questioned it. But Ray and Vanessa know the truth, and they've been holding it over my head ever since. That's why they're here now, not because of stolen jewelry. Eleanor nodded. They know I've found something good here, something worth protecting. They're using Danny's death to control me, to make me come back to them. And the worst part is, they're right. I am a killer, Arthur. I took a life, and then I covered it up like a criminal. Arthur stood up abruptly, and Eleanor flinched, expecting him to walk away, to tell her to leave, to finally see her for what she really was. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the street where his neighbors lived their normal, uncomplicated lives. How old were you when you went into foster care? He asked. The question surprised Eleanor. 5, and how many homes were you in before Ray's? 14. Arthur turned back to her. 14 homes in 14 years. How many of those families hurt you? Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. Most of them. Not all physically, but most of them. So by the time you were 19, you'd spent most of your life learning that adults couldn't be trusted, that the system wouldn't protect you, and that survival meant doing whatever it took to stay alive. Arthur, I killed someone. You defended yourself against a man who was trying to murder you, Arthur interrupted, his voice carrying a strength that surprised them both. A man who'd been abusing you, who'd made it clear he enjoyed hurting you, who picked up a weapon with the intent to kill you. Eleanor stared at him. But I covered it up. I helped them hide the body. You were a terrified teenager with no support system, being manipulated by adults who'd already proven they didn't care about your welfare. Of course you made choices based on fear instead of logic. Arthur sat back down, leaning forward across the table. Eleanor, do you know what I see? When I look at you. She shook her head. I see someone who survived 14 years of abuse and neglect, who fought for her life when someone tried to kill her, and who spent every day since then believing she's a monster because the people who should have protected her convinced her that defending herself made her a criminal. Eleanor felt tears she'd been holding back for months beginning to fall. But what if they're right? What if I am dangerous? What if I hurt you or Lily? Arthur reached across the table and took her hands, holding them gently but firmly. Eleanor, in the 6 weeks you've been with us, you've shown more kindness, courage, and selflessness than most people manage in a lifetime. You saved my daughter's life. You've made both of us happier than we've been since Sarah died. You're not dangerous, you're exactly who we needed. The police will understand self-defense when we explain what really happened. And we will explain it, together, with a lawyer who specializes in domestic violence cases. Eleanor pulled her hands free, standing up abruptly. Arthur, you don't understand what you're saying. If this comes out, your reputation, your job, Lily's future, we'll all be fine, Arthur said firmly, because we'll face it as a family. The word family hit Eleanor like a physical blow. I'm not your family. I'm a foster kid who brought violence into your home. Arthur stood up, moving around the table to face her directly. Eleanor Davies, you are my family. You're Lily's family. You belong to us, and we belong to you, and no amount of guilt or manipulation from your past is going to change that. Eleanor looked at him through tears, seeing not judgment or fear, but the same steady love he showed Lily when she had nightmares. How can you still want me here after what I told you? Because what you told me proves everything I already knew about you. That you're brave, that you're a survivor, and that you protect the people you love, even when it costs you everything. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway made them both turn. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her stuffed elephant and looking concerned. Eleanor? Why are you crying? Eleanor wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. Lily studied both adults with the perception that children often have about emotional undercurrents. Are you leaving again? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor looked at Arthur, then at Lily, and saw her future reflected in their faces, not the future Ray and Vanessa wanted to force on her, but the one she'd been too afraid to claim. No, Eleanor said, and meant it. I'm not leaving. Lily smiled and launched herself at Eleanor, wrapping small arms around her waist. Good, because you're part of our family now, and families stick together. Over Lily's head, Eleanor met Arthur's eyes. In them, she saw not the condemnation she'd expected, but something she'd never dared hope for, unconditional acceptance. So what do we do about Ray and Vanessa? Eleanor asked. Arthur's expression hardened with determination. We tell them the truth. That you're not the scared girl they left in that house 3 months ago. That you have a family now who will stand with you, and that their blackmail ends tonight. They'll call the police. Let them. We'll call them first. Eleanor stared at him. You'd really do that? Risk everything to stand up for me? Stand up for me? Arthur pulled both Eleanor and Lily into a hug, his voice certain and strong. Eleanor, 3 months ago you were alone in the world with no one to protect you. Tonight, you have people who love you, a community that respects you, and legal rights. That will be protected. You're not fighting this battle alone anymore. As they stood in the kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor felt something shift deep inside her, the final breaking of chains she'd carried since childhood. She wasn't a victim anymore, wasn't a killer or a burden or a problem to be solved. She was a daughter, a sister, a member of a family that had chosen her as completely as she'd chosen them. Outside, the evening was growing dark, and somewhere across town, Ray and Vanessa were waiting for her surrender. But Eleanor Davies was done surrendering. Tomorrow she would face her past with the strength that came from having a future worth fighting for. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the truth. Because the truth wasn't just that she'd killed someone in self-defense. It was that she'd found people who loved her enough to stand with her while she healed from it. And that truth was stronger than any lie. Her past could tell. The Millbrook Inn sat on the edge of town like a relic from another era, its neon sign flickering against the October darkness. Arthur parked his truck in the nearly empty lot, turned off the engine, and looked at Eleanor, who was staring at the building with the focused intensity of someone preparing for battle. We don't have to do this tonight, Arthur said quietly. We could call Detective Morrison first. Let her handle the initial contact. Eleanor shook her head. No, I need to face them myself. I need them to see that I'm not the broken girl they left behind. 3 hours earlier, Arthur had made the most important phone call of his life, reaching Detective Patricia Morrison of the Millbrook Police Department. Morrison, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and 20 years of experience dealing with domestic violence cases, had listened to Eleanor's story with the patience of someone who'd heard similar tales too many times. Self-defense cases involving domestic abuse can be complex, Morrison had explained during their meeting at the police station. But from what you've described, Eleanor, you were clearly acting to protect your own life. The fact that you were manipulated into covering it up doesn't change the fundamental nature of what happened. Now, walking across the parking lot toward room 237, Eleanor felt the weight of that conversation settling into confidence. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Arthur's steady presence beside her, Detective Morrison's number programmed into her phone, and the knowledge that whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would face it as someone with people who loved her. Arthur knocked on the door with calm authority. When it opened, Ray Hutchins appeared, his expression shifting from smug satisfaction to confusion as he saw Arthur standing beside Eleanor. Well, Ray said, stepping back to let them enter. You brought your boyfriend. How touching. Vanessa was sprawled across the bed, painting her nails blood red and wearing the kind of smile that promised cruelty. Eleanor, honey, you're early. I thought you'd want to savor your last few hours of playing family. Eleanor stepped into the room with none of the hesitation she'd shown that morning. I'm not here to negotiate, she said, her voice steady. I'm here to tell you that the games are over. Ray laughed, but there was uncertainty beneath the sound. Games? Eleanor, you seem to have forgotten that we hold all the cards here. Danny Kessler's death, the cover-up, your criminal record, self-defense. Arthur interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made both Ray and Vanessa pause. What Eleanor did to Danny Kessler was self-defense against a man who was trying to murder her. Vanessa sat up sharply. Who the hell are you two? I'm Arthur Brown, Arthur said simply. Eleanor's family. And as of 3 hours ago, I'm also a witness in an ongoing police investigation into Danny Kessler's death and the subsequent cover-up orchestrated by Ray Hutchins. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Ray's face had gone pale, and Vanessa's nail polish brush trembled in her hand. You called the cops? Ray's voice had lost its cocky edge. Eleanor stepped forward, and for the first time since entering the room, she smiled. We called Detective Morrison, told her everything. About Danny's history of violence, about what he was trying to do to me that night, about how you convinced a terrified 19-year-old girl that protecting herself was a crime. You stupid little, Vanessa started to snarl, but Arthur cut her off. I'd be very careful about making threats, Arthur said calmly. Detective Morrison is parked outside, recording this conversation through the wire Eleanor's wearing. It was a bluff. Morrison was actually at the station, and there was no wire, but the effect was immediate. Both Ray and Vanessa looked at Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time, recognizing something they'd never expected. Strength, backed by support. Here's what's going to happen, Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. You're going to drive back to wherever you came from, and you're never going to contact me again. You're going to let the police handle the Danny Kessler case properly, through the legal system, with all the facts. And if we don't? Ray asked, but his bravado was cracking. Then Detective Morrison will be very interested in hearing about the drug operation you were running, the systematic abuse of foster children in your care, and your role in manipulating a victim of domestic violence into covering up a justifiable homicide. Arthur added, she'd also be interested in the fact that you drove across state lines to extort and threaten Eleanor. That's federal. Vanessa looked at Ray with growing panic. You said this would be easy. You said she was just some scared kid we could push around. She was, Ray said, but he was looking at Eleanor with something approaching respect. Guess. She isn't anymore. Eleanor took a step closer to Ray, close enough that she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. You spent 3 years telling me I was worthless, that no one would ever want me, that I brought nothing but trouble to everyone who tried to help me. You were wrong. She gestured toward Arthur, who stood beside her like a pillar of strength. I found people who see me for who I really am, who love me not despite my past, but including it, who understand that surviving doesn't make you damaged, it makes you strong. Ray's jaw tightened. You think this is over? You think some small-town mechanic and his kid are going to protect you from the real world? I think, Eleanor said quietly, that the real world is bigger than your kitchen and braver than your fists. I think there are more people like Arthur than there are like you. And I think you know it, or you wouldn't have had to drive 3 hours to try to drag me back to being the person you needed me to be. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Arthur opened it to reveal Detective Morrison, her badge clearly visible, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Mr. Hutchins, Morrison said professionally, we need to talk. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in front of a mirror in the small bathroom she now officially shared with Lily. Adjusting the collar of the navy blue dress Arthur had bought her for the occasion. Through the window she could see spring arriving in Millbrook trees, budding with new green, flowers pushing through the last of winter's resistance, the kind of renewal that felt like promise. The Danny Kessler case had been resolved exactly as Detective Morrison had predicted. The district attorney's office had ruled Eleanor's actions justified self-defense, clearing her of any criminal charges. Ray Hutchins had pled guilty to multiple counts of drug trafficking and abuse, currently serving a 5-year sentence in state prison. Vanessa had received 3 years for her role in the cover-up and the extortion attempt. More importantly, Eleanor had been connected with a trauma counselor who specialized in abuse survivors, helping her process not just Danny's death, but the years of systematic harm that had led to that terrible night. Slowly, painfully, but with the steady support of her family, Eleanor was learning to see herself through kinder eyes. Eleanor, Lily's voice called from the living room. People are starting to arrive. Today was Eleanor's graduation party, not from high school, which she'd never had the chance to finish, but from the GED program she'd completed at Millbrook Community College. Principal Davidson had been true to her word about the teaching opportunity, and Eleanor would be starting work as a safety education coordinator at the elementary school in the fall. Eleanor emerged from the bathroom to find their small apartment filled with people who'd become her chosen family. Mrs. Chen was arranging flowers she'd brought from her garden. Dale Henderson was discussing weekend work schedules with Arthur. Margaret from the school office was helping Lily hang a banner that read, "Congratulations, Eleanor," in glitter letters that would probably be finding their way into the carpet. For months, Mrs. Wickham appeared at Eleanor's elbow, carrying a wrapped package. "This is for you, dear," she said, pressing the gift into Eleanor's hands. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to mark the occasion." Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a framed photo, the newspaper clipping from when she'd saved Lily's life, alongside a new article about her upcoming role at the school. The headline read, "Local hero takes on safety education role." "I'm not a hero," Eleanor said automatically, the old reflex still strong. "Yes, you are," Arthur said, appearing beside her. "You're exactly what heroes look like in real life, someone who survived hell and decided to use that experience to protect other people." Detective Morrison arrived shortly after, still in uniform but carrying a small potted plant. "Sorry I'm late," she said to Eleanor. "Had to testify in another case." "How does it feel to be officially educated?" Eleanor laughed. "Terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "That's usually how the best changes feel," Morrison replied. "By the way, I wanted you to know the department got funding for a new domestic violence education program. We'd like you to help us design the training curriculum for officers responding to abuse calls." Eleanor felt that familiar flutter of disbelief that still came when people saw her as someone with knowledge worth sharing rather than problems worth avoiding. "You really think I could do that?" "Eleanor," Morrison said seriously, "you survived 14 years in a broken system. Defended yourself against a killer, found the courage to tell the truth, and helped us put away 2 dangerous criminals. If that doesn't qualify you to teach people about survival and resilience, I don't know what does." As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor found herself in conversation after conversation with people who'd become part of her life in ways she'd never imagined possible. The mailman asked about her plans for college courses. The librarian wanted to discuss the young adult book club Eleanor was starting for at-risk teens. Even Principal Davidson mentioned the possibility of Eleanor pursuing a degree in education or social work. But the moment that mattered most came when the party was winding down. Dishes were being cleared, and Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with her head in Eleanor's lap. Arthur sat down beside them, his arm coming around Eleanor's shoulders with the casual intimacy of family. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. Eleanor looked around the apartment, their apartment, taking in the drawings Lily had made of their family covering the refrigerator. The bookshelf where her GED study guides sat beside Arthur's technical manuals. The photos from Lily's recent school play, where Eleanor sat beaming in the audience next to Arthur. "I was thinking about that night at the gas station," Eleanor said. "How I was sitting there convinced I was going to die alone, that my whole life had been pointless suffering." Arthur's arm tightened around her. "And now? Now I think maybe the suffering had a point after all. Not because I deserved it, but because it taught me to recognize when someone else is drowning. It gave me tools to help people who are where I used to be." Eleanor looked down at Lily's sleeping face, then up at Arthur's warm brown eyes that had seen her at her worst, and decided she was worth saving anyway. "I used to think family was something that happened to other people," she continued. "Something you were born into or went without. I never understood that it was something you could choose, something you could build from scratch with people who decided to love you." Arthur pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Sarah used to say that families aren't made by blood or law or chance. They're made by people who see each other clearly and choose to stay anyway." Outside, the spring evening was settling into dusk, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere across town, other families were settling into their own rhythms of dinner and homework and bedtime stories. But here, in this small apartment above Kim's dry cleaning, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds were creating their own version of forever. Eleanor. Davy's no longer a foster child, no longer a victim, no longer someone defined by what had been done to her, was home. Not just in a place, but in a life she'd built with people who'd chosen her as completely as she'd chosen them. The girl who'd collapsed against a gas station door had become a woman who stood in front of classrooms teaching children how to stay safe. The broken teenager who'd believed she brought nothing but trouble had become someone people sought out for wisdom and strength. The young woman who'd thought she was a killer had learned she was a survivor. And the man who'd stopped to help a stranger in a parking lot had discovered that sometimes saving someone else is exactly how you save yourself. As Arthur carried Lily to her bedroom and Eleanor began clearing the last of the party dishes, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The face looking back at her bore faint scars from old injuries, laugh lines earned through hard-won joy, and eyes that no longer held the hollow desperation of someone waiting for the next disaster. For the first time in her life, Eleanor saw someone she was proud to be. 2 years later, when Eleanor walked across the stage at Millbrook Community College to receive her associate degree in social work, Arthur and Lily cheered from the audience with the pride of people who'd watched a miracle unfold in their own living room. In the crowd, Detective Morrison smiled, knowing that the scared girl she'd first met in a police station had become the kind of person who made the world safer for everyone in it. and somewhere in the Ohio Department of Children's Services, Eleanor's file was marked with a note that would follow her forever. Survivor, advocate, hero, family. The gas station where Arthur had first found Eleanor was still there, still open 24 hours, still witness to the desperate and the lost who moved through its fluorescent light in search of somewhere better. But now, when people heard about the woman who'd been saved there and had gone on to save others, it became a symbol of something different, proof that miracles could happen anywhere, to anyone, and that sometimes the person you save might just turn out to be the person who saves you right back. Eleanor Davies had learned the most important truth of all: that home isn't a place you're born into or a destination you arrive at, but a life you build with people who see your scars and love you not despite them, but because of everything they represent about your strength, your courage, and your absolutely unbreakable will to survive. And in that truth, she finally found peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.